Hey guys, in this video you're going to learn the top 35 most important chess principles. A chess principle is just like a guideline or a rule that generally speaking you should follow and you're going to get into better positions. So you've probably heard control the center of the board. That is an example of a chess principle. It's true most of the time. Sometimes you will need to control some other squares on the board, but usually the center is most important. And what you might not know is that there are actually hundreds of different chess principles. So in this video, I've narrowed down the top 35 that I think are the most important, and I'm going to share those with you right now. Rule number one, no surprise here, is control the center of the board. Usually the player who controls the center of the board has a better chance to win the game than somebody who is making a lot of moves on the side of the board. Principle number two is develop your pieces quickly. Developing your pieces just means moving your knights and bishops off of the back rank. So knight here, and then getting your bishops out. In this position, white is going to have much better chances to win the game because he has developed his pieces, while black has not and just made a bunch of pawn moves. Principle number three, knights before bishops. Usually when developing, you want to develop your knights first and then follow it up with your bishops. Principle number four, don't move the same piece twice in the opening. If you're moving the same piece multiple times in the opening, it means you're not developing your other pieces and you're going to fall behind in development and probably get into a worse position. Principle number five is don't bring out your queen too early. Although the queen is a powerful piece, if you bring it out too early, it just ends up getting harassed by your opponent's pieces and you waste a lot of time. As an example, if I play e4, d6, and I bring my queen out immediately, after knight f6, I have to move my queen. Maybe I'll move it over to a5. After knight c6, I have to move my queen again, and all of a sudden I'm falling behind in development. So don't bring out your queen too early. Principle number six is castle before move 10. If you look at this example, it's possible to castle in as little as 4 moves, and usually after you castle, your king is safe behind a wall of pawns, better than being in the center of the board. Principle number 7 is connect your rooks. So after you've developed your pieces and you've castled, you can simply move your queen up, and now your rooks are connected. This is beneficial because your rooks protect each other, they can help each other, and they also have easy access to go to whatever file you need them to, which is going to be most beneficial for you. Principle number 8 is that rooks should go on open or half open files. In the position on the board right now, the e file is an open file because there are no pawns on it. So a move like rook to e1 would make a lot of sense because it's putting my rook on the open file. A half open file is a file that only has one color pawn on it. So for example, the d file is a half open file because it only has a black pawn and no white pawn. So this would also be a smart move because I'm putting this rook on a half open file. Black's rook on f8 is already on a half open file because there's only one color pawn on it. Principle number 9, knights on the rim are grim. You can see in this position how black's knight is very effective, covering a lot of important squares in the center, and my knight on the side is not doing as much. It only covers a few squares. So keeping your knights towards the center of the board is better than putting them on the side. Principle number 10, try to avoid doubled pawns. In this position, if black captures my knight and I recapture with this pawn, I've created a set of doubled pawns. Doubled pawns are when one pawn is on the same file as another pawn. This is usually a disadvantage because this guy's blocked by this guy so he can't move, and also they can't help each other and defend each other if they needed to. It's very easy for me to move this pawn up and it's defended by this one, or to move this one up and it's defended by this one. You can't do that with doubled pawns. So usually you want to try to avoid those. Principle number 11 is try to avoid isolated pawns. Isolated pawns are pawns that have no pawns on the adjacent files. So this a pawn is an isolated pawn because there's no pawns of the same color on the file right next to it. And these doubled pawns on c2 and c3 happen to be double isolated pawns because again there are no white pawns on either side of them. So isolated pawns and double isolated pawns are particularly weak and they can't help each other like connected pawns can. Principle number 12, try to avoid backward pawns. In this position, if black plays pawn to c4, he's created a backward pawn on d5. A backward pawn means that all of the pawns on the adjacent files have been pushed in front of that pawn and can therefore no longer help protect it. When this pawn was back here on c6, it was protecting it so that it wasn't a backward pawn. Because of the way it's been pushed forward, now this is a backward pawn, and it's a very easy target for white to pile up on because it can't be defended by another pawn. Principle number 13 is don't trade a bishop for a knight without a good reason. So even though they are both worth 3 points, generally speaking, bishops tend to be slightly better than knights. So I see a lot of players will bring bishops out, trade them off for a knight, and it usually isn't worth it. Now in this case, you do create doubled pawns, but you also give black a half open file and you lose the bishop. So generally speaking, you don't want to make that trade unless you have a little bit better of a reason to do it. Principle number 14, avoid moving pawns in front of your castled king. So in this position, we've already castled on the king side. It would be a mistake to play a move like g3 because now I've created these weaknesses because the pawn no longer controls those squares. You can see how easily black can come in and infiltrate it and put a lot of pressure on your king. So don't move pawns in front of your castled king. Principle 15 is don't open the center if your king is still in the center. In this position, black could consider playing d5, but it wouldn't be a good idea because after white trades, he started to open up the center and his king could come under pressure from white's rook because he hasn't castled yet. So it would be better for black to castle first and then consider a move like d5, which is going to start trading and opening up the center of the board. Principle number 16 is that 2 minor pieces are generally better than a rook and a pawn. Minor pieces are knights and bishops. Obviously, these are the rooks. So in this position, if I were to capture with my knight, black captures, I capture, he captures, I just lost a knight and a bishop, which is 6 points. I gained a rook and a pawn, which is also 6 points. But it puts me at a disadvantage because the knight and the bishop are better than the rook and the pawn, generally speaking. So don't make a trade like that unless you have a very specific reason to do so. Principle number 17 is similar, but 3 minor pieces generally is better than a queen. Even though they both add up to 9 points, usually the 3 pieces will greatly outperform the queen. Principle number 18 is that rooks are very strong on the 7th rank. So since I'm white, the 7th rank is here. For black, the 7th rank is actually the 2nd rank, which would be here. But in this position, I have the ability to play rook e7, which is a very strong move. By placing my rook on the 7th rank, you can see I have lots of good targets, and white is in a very good position because of the ability to get the rook on the 7th rank. Principle number 19 is that doubled rooks on an open file are very strong. In this position, white already has control of the open file with 1 rook, but he has the ability to put 2 rooks now controlling that open file, and it prevents black from gaining control of that file as well. So 2 rooks on an open file is very strong. Principle number 20, bishops are better in open positions, knights are better in closed positions. The position on the board, you can see black's bishops are doing a lot, controlling a lot of squares because the position is open and they're not blocked by very many pieces. In this position, the bishops are going to probably outperform the knights. Now, on the other hand, in a position like this, where lots of pawns are kind of blocked off and it's relatively closed, you can see how black's bishops aren't really doing a lot. They're running into pawns that are in the way, and the knights can very easily hop around and get to wherever you need them to get to. So in this case, the knights are going to do better as opposed to the other position where it was more open. The bishops would be better. Principle number 21, the best way to deal with an attack on the flank is to counterattack in the center. In this position, white's castled. If black starts to launch a flank attack on the side, the best thing that white could do would be to strike back in the center and try to open up the center and take advantage of the fact that black's king is still in the center. So to deal with a flank attack, a counterattack in the center. Principle number 22, when you have an option to capture a piece with 2 different pawns, generally you want to capture towards the center of the board. In this position, if black captures this bishop on b3, white now has the option to capture with 2 different pawns. So as the rule goes, generally speaking, you want to capture towards the center, so you should take this way. We also get the added benefit in this position that we create a half open file for the rook. Principle number 23 is that in an endgame, the king is a valuable piece that must be used to help you win the game. In this position, it would be a mistake for white to leave his king sit over here and not try to use the king to help attack these pawns or these pawns. Same thing for black. He would need to use his king to try to get involved and do something to help out. Principle number 24, rooks should go behind passed pawns. In the position on the board, black has a passed pawn on this g-file. A really good move for him would be to put his rook behind his passed pawn so they can support it as he pushes it and tries to eventually get a queen. If black didn't know that and played a move like rook here to defend his pawn that way, it's not going to be as good, and now white also has the ability to put the rook behind the passed pawn, which creates pressure, and at any point if the pawn tries to move forward, the rook is still going to be attacking it. really making it hard for that pawn to move forward. So rook should go behind passed pawns. Principle number 25 is that 2 connected passed pawns on the 6th rank will always beat a rook. In this position, it's white's turn, and by playing this pawn forward, he now has achieved 2 connected and passed pawns on the 6th rank. And if this rook tries to stop them, he's not going to be able to do it. For example, if the rook goes here to try to get this pawn, white can simply move this one forward, and if the rook captures, white's going to get a queen. We go back. If black tries to play here to try to get one of the 2 pawns again, white simply pushes the pawn forward, and after black captures, he gets a queen. And you can see that if I move just 1 pawn back, now black does have the ability to stop the pawns by moving his rook here. If white tries to move this one forward, it's going to get captured. If he tries to move this one forward, it's going to get captured, and he doesn't have enough time. Black's able to catch it and then capture the queen. So going back, both of the connected passed pawns have to already be on the 6th rank, and then the rook cannot stop them. Principle number 26 is to attack the base of a pawn chain. In this position, white has this very long pawn chain, and you can see how all of these pawns are defended by the other pawns in the pawn chain, except for the base. That's the only pawn that's not going to be defended by another pawn. So if you're able to attack the base of the pawn chain, that's what you should do. Now this probably isn't the greatest example because it's going to be very hard for black to figure out a way to attack that pawn right now, but generally speaking, attack the base of a pawn chain. Principle 27 is that knights are usually one of the best blockaders of pawns. So in this position, black has a passed pawn that he's trying to push forward, and white would like to blockade it to keep it from moving. A good option would be to blockade it with the knight. The reason this is good is because knights can still function very well because they can jump over pieces. They can still put pressure on the normal squares that they would be able to put pressure on. At the same time, they're blockading the pawn from moving. Principle number 28 is if your position is cramped, you should try to trade pieces to open it up and give you more options. So in this position, black's position is very cramped. This bishop is stuck, this bishop is stuck. He doesn't have a lot of options for his pieces. So one thing that he should consider doing is trading pieces. In this example, he can capture here. If white captures, he can capture here. If white captures, he can capture here. And by trading off all those pieces, now he's able to move this knight somewhere, and then this bishop can go somewhere. It's a much better position for black, having traded off all those pieces, than if we go back to this position where he could hardly move. So in a cramped position, try to trade pieces. Principle number 30 is that when you're ahead material, you want to trade pieces but not trade pawns. In this position, white is ahead a rook for a knight. It's called being up the exchange. He has a 2-point advantage. So he would want to trade the queen and rook for the queen and rook, but not trade the pawns. That's because after you trade these pieces, the rook is going to be very strong. He's going to be able to capture some of these pawns most likely, and then he can get a queen. If he trades off all the pawns, so there's no pawns left, then the rook and the knight, it's going to be very hard to win that position. So you want to leave pawns on the board when you're ahead material and trade off the other pieces. Principle number 31, very similar, is the opposite of that. When you're losing or you're down material, you want to trade off all the pawns if you can, but don't trade the pieces. And that's going to increase your chances of getting a draw. So in this position, if white captures this pawn and black recaptures, he could take this pawn with his queen. But that's not good for white because he's essentially going to be trading pawns. He wants to keep as many pawns on the board as possible. So a better move might be queen to d3, trying to trade the pieces and not trade the pawns. I hope that made sense. If you have to rewatch that part again, feel free to do so. That's an important one. It's really good to know. Principle number 32 is that opposite colored bishop games are dangerous in the middle game and drawish in the end game. What do I mean by that? In this position, both players have an opposite colored bishop. That means white's bishop is on a dark square and black's bishop is on a white square. So they're opposite colored bishops. And since this is still in what I would say the middle game, it's very dangerous and white has to be very careful. And you can see after this move, bishop check, king g1, after queen g4, the queen's coming into f3, and then there's going to be a battery, white's going to get checkmated. So the only thing he could do is sacrifice his rook for the bishop to stay alive. And that just shows how it's very dangerous when you're playing in a game with opposite colored bishops. You have to watch out for attacks on your king, and the reason it's dangerous is really because your bishop can do nothing to prevent the other person's bishop. So in this case, there are weaknesses along these white squares, and this bishop can do nothing about it. If it was a knight, you could position it to help defend, or if you had the same color bishop, if you had a bishop on the white squares, you could even trade it off for that bishop. But because they're opposite colored bishops, you can't do that. Very dangerous. Now the flip side of that principle is that in the endgame, the games become very drawish. You can see in this position, both players have opposite colored bishops, and because of that, the bishop can't really do anything about any of these pawns. And likewise, black's bishop can't do anything about white's pawn, so the pawns are just going to end up sitting there. The kings will probably just have to move back and forth, and nobody's going to be able to win this game. So keep that in mind. Opposite colored bishops are drawish in the endgame, but very dangerous in the middle game. Principle number 33 is what's called don't play hope chess. Now, if you've never heard of this, hope chess is where you play chess and you hope that your opponent does something, or you hope that your opponent doesn't see something, or I hope he moves there. If you're playing chess like that, you're probably not going to do very well. You always want to consider the fact that your opponent might do the very best move. An example of hope chess would be, I'm going to play here, I'm going to bring my bishop out, I'm going to bring my queen out, and I'm going to hope that he doesn't see the checkmate. I'm going to hope that he doesn't know about the scholar's mate, and I'm going to win 4 moves. I'm going to hope he falls for my trick. That's not good, because if he knows what he's doing, he plays g6, stops your queen, you come back to try it again because you hope he doesn't see it. He's going to play knight f6. You might play queen b3 again. I hope he doesn't see it. He's going to play queen e7, and now all of a sudden you're in a bad position. You just wasted a bunch of moves with your queen because you were playing hope chess. So try not to do that. Principle 34 is when you see a good move, stop and look for a better move. In this position on the board, black just played here, which is really a bad move. And so the move that might jump out to a lot of people is, oh, that's a free rook. That's a really good move. It's good for white. But if you take a second and look for a better move, you might notice that knight to d6 is actually a beautiful smothered checkmate. So when you see a good move, take a second and look for a better move. And principle number 35 is that a really good chess player knows the right time to ignore chess principles. All of these principles are really good most of the time, but there's always going to be situations where they don't apply and where it makes the most sense to go against what the principle would say. And that's what determines a really good chess player from somebody who's still learning. So just know that everything that I told you is a good general rule of thumb, but be on the lookout for special situations where they may not apply, and that will come with practice. As you get better and better, you'll pick up on when it's okay to break the rules, if you will.